Hello and welcome back to the Roots Marriage and Ministry Moment with Dr. J.C. Matthews and my beautiful wife Gena. And we want to continue in the episode or the study that we began in the last episode entitled The Three C's of a Successful Marriage. The very first C that we tackled in our first episode of that particular title was cultivation.
Right.
Cultivation. And so what we want to talk to you today about is communication. That's the second C. The very third C, or the last C, is conflict resolution. I'm not sure if we'll get to there, get there today, but we will cover that third C. But what we want to talk to you today about and to focus on is communication. Communication. This is probably the one area that most couples have the most difficulty in, especially earlier on.
Yes.
In being able to overcome some of the initial hurdles that just two dissimilar people coming together from two different cultures,
Yes.
as we talked about, coming together and coming into one space to form one family. The glue, if you will, the mortar that holds that together is communication. Communication. And when you're talking about communication, I look at the word communication. The root word for that is to commune. Commune. So there's more to communication than just talking.
Right.
Commune. To commune means to share, and it also means to become one or to dwell together, to come together. That's why people that live in a close proximity to one another is called a community,
Right.
because they live within proximity of one another. And so when you're talking about communication, you're talking about a level of communing with one another where there's sharing, where there is closeness, togetherness, community, a lot of different things that transcend just talking.
Like we talked about in the first thing on the three C's, it is important to keep the vision of the marriage in whatever it is that you're doing, because when we talk about talking, I've always been a person who doesn't believe in using words that just talking to just be talking. I think that there has to be purpose behind your communication, especially when you're trying to cultivate something, you're trying to build something. So I think it's very important that we recognize that the communication that we have there, we're trying to do something with the communication that we're doing between the husband and wife.
And as a matter of fact, another meaning of the word communicate is to take something from one place to another. Think about it when you commute to work. You're going from home to work, where that commute was taking you from one place to another. So think about this. When you're attempting to communicate, you're trying to take what's on the inside of you and allow it to arrive in the same composition and fashion
Right.
as it is in you and the other person. Now that takes work.
Yes, it does.
Work, because there's distance, there's cultures, there's experiences, there's a whole lot of other things that along the route of your commute can cause accidents.
Yes.
If you will. So there's this effort to arrive what you have dispatched. It arrives safely and intact, whole in other person.
Right.
And so think about that.
It's important to, especially I'm speaking in regards to women, because a lot of times women are very emotional communicators, and it's very important that you recognize that sometimes emotions, just like you were talking about, you being in traffic where you have to be careful how you're going so you don't have an accident. Sometimes emotions can cause what you're communicating to change. where the other party isn't receiving what it is that you actually sent out.
Right. And it is true. Women and men communicate
differently.
differently.
Yes.
That's why, in the very first episode of Roots Marriage Ministry Moment, we talk about learning your wife, or learning from a spouse's standpoint or wife's standpoint, your husband,
Yeah.
because that will determine how you communicate. Again,
Yes.
how you are able to receive from one another and come to understand truly what a person intends.
Yes.
And so I wrote some things down here I wanted to make sure that we covered. Understanding, seeking to know and understand what was said and intended, not what you think you heard. Hearing is not the same as understanding. That's something that I think every couple has had that experience.
Yes.
And it's one of the most frustrating exercises to think that you said something clearly, and the other person interprets what you said totally different.
Yes.
And therefore either does or does not do something that you were expecting as a result of you communicating in a certain way. And oftentimes what you will find out is that it was perceived or received in a very different fashion.
Right.
And so it means something totally different to the other person.
Right.
And there are some communication obstacles too. I mean, if you have a history of communicating in a certain way or acting in a certain way, those types of external elements will add definition to that person's ability to understand what you said, or what they understood you to say.
Right.
And that becomes very difficult. That's why we talked about the very first session of the 3 C's. Cultivation is necessary, because you really do have to learn and learn how to filter out a lot of things that are troubling the ability to be understood.
Right. It's along with that, thinking about cultivating, you have to cultivate your communication. We've talked about how coming from 2 different cultures, you may have come from a dysfunctional family. You may have come from a family that did not communicate in a productive way, where it's just ridiculous, some of the things that we've seen and heard in people's situations. But you have to cultivate your communication to deal with your spouse.
Right. And I think the principle that we see throughout Scripture is that in the Bible tells us to season your communication with love.
Yes.
With not eros, not even philios, but agape.
Yes.
Because what that does is it allows God into the conversation. I mean, like I said before, one of the things that I trained myself to do was to, whenever we were in a conflict type of or confrontational setting where we were communicating, we were just not connecting.
Right.
And then your emotions and your feelings, they start to get all out of whack. One of the things the Lord showed me was, He says, wait a minute, stop everything and tell her that you love her.
Right.
And it seems like whatever was going off the rails, you would feel it come back onto the rails.
Right.
And all of a sudden things start moving in a direction where we can get something done.
Right.
And I can't say it enough. There's a spiritual element.
I was just about to say that.
To communication.
Yes.
I realized that, not on purpose. I didn't say, oh, let me get spiritual. I just started recognizing that when I obeyed the voice of God to say those things,
it changed the atmosphere.
There was something that left the room.
That's
literally.
Right. Yes.
Something that left the room. And only then, because anything that's said with that spirit there,
right,
it's not going to be communicated properly.
Right.
That spirit, as soon as you say the words, it'll add something on it so
right.
that by the time it reaches her or him, it's something totally.
You're hearing something totally different. You're thinking that this person is thinking something totally different it's not being communicated, and there is spiritual interference.
Absolutely. And again, these lessons are tied together. Part of the cultivation process we talked about was getting to understand the other person, getting to trust. You have to cultivate trust
Yes.
and cultivate value in the other person.
Mm-hmm.
If you're speaking to your spouse and they don't feel you value them,
Right.
um, you could try to say it in as many different ways and in many different languages as you want. The person doesn't feel like you mean what you say,
Right.
or that
they don't trust you.
Yeah, I don't trust what you're trying to take advantage of me, or you're trying to get what you want,
Right.
or you're not trying to do what's best for us. You just want to be right.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever you have whenever you have that type of history, if that did take place, again, the cultivation process, the trust factor
Right.
has to be built back up, because now there's something that is contaminating your communication.
Yes.
That the person has learned how to receive what you say based on maybe experiences or maybe even past relationships. We talked about that.
Right.
That again, that cultivation process is very, very necessary so that there could be clarity and purity
Right.
in the transactions within a marriage, and that cultivation is necessary for effective communication.
Yes. Being able to take things that are negative, um, your thought process, how you feel, or like you were talking about experiences, like if you've experienced negative situations with your spouse and the communication is coming out and you take that experience and put it on top of that communication, you are not going to take that communication the way it was intended. And it is so important that we don't hold on to things that are not good for our garden.
Yeah, I think now that I think about it, communication in marriage is more difficult than communication in business,
Yeah.
communication in any other arena, because there it's so personal
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that that's how it can become toxic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to articulate what I have in my spirit. Um, tox, toxic a toxic relationship and toxic communication is a result of a root. That's what we've been talking about. Root. A root having been developed in one or the other or both
Right.
individuals that is unhealthy as it relates to their perception of the other person.
Right.
And so, and because marriage is such a vulnerable
That's yes.
vulnerable relationship, if that person has been taken advantage of or exposed in any area, that wound can be so deep and the root can be so established that there has to be some evasive
Yes.
action,
Yes.
intentional action on the part of the offender
Mm-hmm.
to begin the process of regrowing new roots.
Right. And you have to remember it's a process. The things that take place within a marriage, just one act can cause things to be thrown off. And that one act, saying I'm sorry sometimes is not enough. You have to realize that there's a process in building back that trust and getting to the place where the communication is not toxic and there's no bitter root in either of the couple.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a process.
Yeah, and in those type, if you're in a situation where you and your spouse cannot communicate, there's various ways of communicating that you haven't availed yourself to, and I talk about them a little bit in some of the in the next lesson, conflict resolution. But what I want to suggest is that what I've seen in toxic relationships, in counseling toxic relationships, sometimes the worst thing the person can do is demand that you talk about it,
Right.
the issue.
Right.
We're gonna talk about this now. No, we can't let this go. And what I try to do in those situations, in listening to couples or listening to one of the other parties, is I try to discern first of all, is that is that speech motivated in love?
Right. Because
Usually it's not. Um, is what the individual wanting to talk about really the issue?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Or is there something that this issue, what you want to talk about right now, is a gateway to
something else,
opening up something else that you really got problems with?
Right.
What's the tone of the communication?
Mm-hmm.
Some men can come off as very domineering,
Mm-hmm.
and some women can too.
Yes. Very true.
There are, what position psychologically has the person taken in the conversation? Is one a victim?
Mm-hmm.
So no matter what you say in regard, when you're speaking to somebody who has a victim mentality, no matter what you say, they will perceive it in a fashion in which they come out not ahead,
Right.
or the tail and not the head, last and not first. There's something that turns the whole conversation around, and you have to recognize, and that person has taken on that perception of themselves as a result of some things.
Right.
So
Right.
there has to be a lot of understanding.
Yeah. That recultivating, when things have gone in a direction that you don't want, you have to, just like in a garden, when weeds come up in a garden, you've got to redo that garden, because you can't just let it be, because the weeds will take over whatever it is that you're trying to grow.
And you can't just chop the top of the weeds off.
No, you
got
to dig it up. So it's like recultivating, it's starting over, planting fresh things and getting rid of those negative things.
One of the things that, and it's part of, again, a conflict resolution part, but one of the things the Lord showed me is that part of communication can be silence.
Yes. Yeah.
Can be silence. Silence can mean a lot of different things, but there's a time to talk, and then there's a time to be silent.
Right.
Like I said, sometimes the worst thing that a person can do is try to engage a person that is hurt,
Yes.
that views you as the offender, and you do all the talking, trying to fix a situation that they don't want to hear your voice anymore.
Exactly.
They just might need some space. You might need some space, and you might need to even articulate that to them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to allow you. I'm going to allow you and the Lord to talk, and I'm going to, don't position it like you the spiritual one. You need to go talk to the Lord. You need to have a conversation with the Lord, because He's the only one that can fix your stuff. That. No, the conversation should be, I'm gonna go talk to the Lord myself. I need to get silent. I need to think. I need to hear right.
Right.
I need a different view.
Mm-hmm.
Again, because I love you.
Mm-hmm.
These are the type of conversations that we have. Mm-hmm. I have to say these things to myself a lot of times to properly leave a conversation, so that we can both go through the process of self inspection, of inspecting the communication that has taken place so far. I'll say things like, I need to hear from the Lord. I need for Him to deal with my heart. I need for Him to speak to me so that I can hear clearly. Not putting it on you, like you need to have the Lord talk to your heart, and you need to get in a place where you can hear from the Lord.
Right. It's very important to not have a toxic atmosphere in the middle of communication. Like he's saying, just taking time to allow it to become calm, instead of wanting to get at each other and wanting to, I have this to say or whatever, to allow things to be calm, to allow God to speak to both of you. But that atmosphere has to change because when it's toxic, neither one are going to receive what the other person has to say.
Yeah, and I want to challenge you in your communication. Start to say this to one another whenever you get to a place of impasse or maybe there's a conflict. I know that if there's anybody for me,
Yes.
it's you.
That's right.
Gina and I practice that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, um, and again, this is something that God has shared with me because I started recognizing that my frustration in a lot of our communication um, was a result of me believing that I said something and it was understood. And then when she didn't respond in a certain way, I took it as she understood what I said, but she just didn't want to do or to fall in line with what was said. Because in me saying it, I thought it was best for us. I thought I was doing what was right. When she understood it a different way, and therefore she responded in a way that she felt was in line with what I said, I started to realize I was like, I really do need to be um, more discerning of what happens when a husband and wife communicate.
Yes.
So I will say things like this. I will say when I start to sense that I said something, but you didn't receive it in the same way, I will say, baby, I know if there's anybody for me, it's you.
Mm-hmm.
If there's anybody who knows me, JC, good and bad, and you still here, it's you. So I know you're for me. I love you. Now now what that does, it opens up that gulf between you and her and allows, I believe, true communing.
Right.
What's inside of you to commute to the other person so that it can be understood. Again, that's something that I've had to do, that I try to practice because I communicate with a lot of assumptions. And it's the same thing in ministry, same thing in preaching. I'll preach a message, teach a message. It ain't no way all the scripture that I provided, all of the examples that I provided, that a person cannot leave here understanding what I said. You get to the next week, you start teaching, looking in folks' eyes, people's eyes, you're like, they don't understand what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
And you can get frustrated, or you can say, wait a minute, it's my responsibility. I'm the communicator.
Right.
I'm the one. I got to make sure at whatever level they at, I'm going to have to bring it down, or if they up here, I got to bring it up to where they're at so that we both can be edified. There's edification that can take place. And the same thing is true in a marriage.
Yeah, it's very important. Um, as I had mentioned earlier, emotionally, sometimes you're not in a right emotional place to communicate. And what you were saying about silence, it's important to know those times when you need to be silent. You need to get to yourself so that you can ask God to help you to get to an emotional place where you can hear. Because at some point when conflict comes, there's times where your hearing is just cut off, and so you have to make sure that emotionally you're in a place where you are able to communicate with your spouse. Because if you are hot, you're upset, you may get to the place where it doesn't matter. They could be saying anything, and I talk about this a lot. It sounds like Charlie Brown. I don't hear what you're saying because I've allowed my emotions to overtake anything that's being said. So it's very important that emotionally we allow ourselves to be in a good place before we try to communicate.
Yeah, and words are so powerful.
They are.
In the sense that you have to even check and discern, evaluate the purpose for why you're saying something.
Yes.
Because you can say something that sounds right, that has at its root the wrong purpose,
Yes.
and it won't have the same impact.
That's right.
Because Words are alive.
Their seed.
They're living, and you have to recognize that. Ask yourself, why am I saying this to the other person? Is it truly to get understanding? Is it truly for reconciliation? Is it truly to whatever is it true?
Mm-hmm.
Because if there's another motivation behind, or another spirit
Right.
behind what you're saying, so a person can say, like I've been talking about, practice saying I love you,
Mm-hmm.
or you're for me and not against me.
Right.
Imagine a spirit where a person's, you're all worked up and you're emotional.
Mm-hmm.
You say, listen, don't you understand I love you?
It's like a raw
I'm for you, not against you. And the person's going, the word you said
mm-hmm.
that came out of your mouth did not match up with the spirit
exactly
by which it was delivered. And the spirit, since words are spirit, is going to be predominantly what they have received.
mm-hmm.
So they heard you, but you aren't going to be understood.
That's right. It has to be a right motivation, a right spirit when you're communicating with your spouse.
And so one of the things that a person can do immediately, recognize, is there a communication problem
Mm-hmm.
at whatever level. Recognize that there's roots, there's reasons why
Mm-hmm.
there are this disconnect in the communication. You got to uproot those roots. You got to address those roots. All the nice words, the presence, and doing all the right things. If the person has developed a root of bitterness, or if the person has learned not to trust you, or if the person has been injured in some way, form, or fashion, those things are going to have to be dealt with so that the lines of communication can be clear.
Right.
Secondly, practice those types of things that we talked about in regards to disarming the communication, the spiritual warfare. Introduce the love of God into that situation, empathy, and true communion with the person. Let the person know, I'm here with you.
Mm-hmm.
We're not adversaries. We just don't have a common understanding yet
right.
of what it is that we're trying to do or to accomplish.
If you allow the Spirit of God to minister to each of you as you're trying to communicate, you calm down, you're able to be at peace and not wanting to get at each other's throats. God will speak through each person.
Mm-hmm.
So you just have to allow Him to work through you when those situations come up, to get the situation where it's not toxic, where you're not overly emotional, where you can hear each other, and then be led by God in what you're saying so that the communication has a right motive, right purpose, and you are able to commune.
Yeah, one of the last things that I want to share with you is the necessity of developing or redeveloping empathy.
Yes.
With one another. Empathy, not sympathy. Empathy. You actually have reestablished, if it's been broken, that connection of unity and love with one another. One of the things that breaks my heart is to see her cry. I love her, so when I see her cry and I'm the cause of it, I want to correct it. And so, but I have to learn how to communicate in that environment, whatever the environment was. If I caused it, how will she accept reconciliation or that process of communication? Like I said, sometimes she just needs to be left alone.
Right.
Sometimes God, do I need to hug her? Do I need to go over there and hug her? Do I need to say anything? And that's because I have empathy.
Right.
There's still a connection. What I've discerned in a lot of different marriage or relationship, empathy and that intimacy has been severed.
Yes.
So they are really dealing with an adversary in those types of environments. And what they need to do in a real sense to establish their communication is to reestablish communing with one another.
Right.
You gotta you gotta find somewhere that person that you married and the reasons why you married them.
Yes.
You have to develop the romance and the intimacy to re-engage those life-giving realities, that spirit again in your relationship, or your communication will continually be a problem in your marriage because that connection, the life source of that marriage communication has been severed.
You have to continue, like we said in the first episode, continue to cultivate your garden. You have to continue to cultivate your marriage, do things that are necessary to keep that love between each other going. Romance is a beautiful thing. It doesn't matter how many years you've been married. Romance
You get better.
Yes.
I'm gonna tell you the
It's
truth.
wonderful.
It gets better. And I can tell you this: if you are going through a situation right now where you are thinking about separation, or there's some things in the past that you haven't been able to get over, um, there has to be a renewal of the process of intimacy,
Yes.
and that does involve digging up some old roots. That's going to take some time. That's going to take some cultivation. That's going to take understanding. That's going to take wisdom and empathy and all the type of things that we're talking about. But it is possible, and at the forefront of it has to be God's word and God's love.
Yes.
God's love is unconditional. So what we want to do is leave you with those remarks. Again, if you haven't watched any of the other episodes, learning your wife or spouse, and then the most recent teaching that we've been doing on the 3 C's. We talked about cultivation in the first. We've talked about communicating in this one. In the upcoming one, we're going to deal with conflict resolution. Join us. Tell your friends. Share with your family. Share with other married couples. Share with those who might even be thinking about getting married. It'll be a blessing to them. And Gena and I will continue to do our best to do this on a weekly basis. Send us your comments and questions. We have a website, jcmatthews.org, genamatthews.com. You can watch us on Facebook, Dr. JC Matthews or Gena Matthews, or you can go to YouTube at JC Matthews Ministries, and you'll see these episodes posted. We want to hear from you and connect with you. God bless you. Until next time, I'm Dr. JC Matthews. My beautiful wife, Gena, we say thank you so much. May God continue to bless you and keep you until we meet again. We'll see you then.